Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photog J the Great. Right now there's not just a whole lot new for me to take a look at. I'm still waiting to get my hands on the Canon EOS M, and it'll be interesting to see if Nikon actually announces the D600. But until then, I figured we would just kind of do another comparison video. So today we're going to be looking at the Nikon D7000 and the Sony A65. Both of these cameras are very close in terms of price. A lot of people may be wondering why I'm not comparing the A65 to like the, why I'm not comparing the D7000 to like the A77 instead. Right now, at least here in the US, there's a savings on the D7000, and that makes it much closer in price to the A65. So the A77 is actually, a bit more, or significantly more expensive. So I decided to compare the A65 instead. Before I go any further, if you guys don't even want to watch the rest of this video at all, I will say right now that I don't think you can go wrong with either of these, which there's no surprise there. That's how most of these DSLRs are these days, honestly. But I will say that both of these cameras are aimed at very different types of users. If you are someone who's upgrading from a compact camera, or if you're getting a DS, or even if you're upgrading DSLRs, and you're not necessarily going to be using a lot more of the manual settings, you just want something that's very quick, that takes very good photos and very high quality video, I would say that's basically where the A65 comes in. It has the faster continuous shooting capability thanks to Sony's translucent mirror technology, so it's able to shoot 10 frames per second, which is very quick. You'd have to go up, especially a Nikon, you'd have to go up to like a D300 or a D4 to get that type of speed. So you'd have to go up to multi-$1,000 pro-level DSLRs to get that type of speed of Nikon. So if you're looking for something like that, the Sony's going to be much better. The Sony also does a much better job for video if you're expecting the camera to perform more like a camcorder. So if you're buying a DSLR and you want to get very good quality photos and you want to be able to use it more or less as a camcorder as well and have it autofocus and behave the way most camcorders do, the A65 is going to be better for that also. On the flip side of things, the D7000 is a camera that will also get you started in terms of, if you just want to put it on auto and take photos, it will certainly do that. But really the D7000 is aimed towards people that are going to do that, but have plans of moving up and getting more advanced later on, or people that are already more advanced right now, because it allows you better access to manual controls, which we're going to look at all those things just here next. And it also allows you to have more manual controls in video. So if you're wanting to get into any type of cinematography and manually adjust audio levels and that sort of thing, the D7000 is going to be better in that regard. So both really great DSLRs aimed at two different types of users. But anyways, now we are going to go ahead and take a closer look at both of these cameras close up. Taking a closer look at both of these, we're going to look at both of the controls on each of these individually. I will go ahead and point out one thing. I'm not really going to, this is not really the sort of comparison where there's a winner or a loser per se. I feel like both of these cameras are very good, but they're clearly aimed at two different types of users, and that's what I'm going to show you in more detail now. So we're going to start with the Nikon, and if we look at it, one of the first things you notice on the Nikon, whoops, if I get this camera focused, there we go. One of the first things you notice on the Nikon is basically just how the controls are laid out. It does still have a full green auto mode, which if you go to anything higher than this in Nikon's lineup, you will find that you don't have the green auto and you don't have any scene modes. So that's something that is present on this camera. If you put this camera in the auto mode, it's going to pop up the flash when it feels like it needs it. It's going to adjust shutter speed and aperture. Basically going to be like a very big point and shoot camera. While I wouldn't recommend using this as a point and shoot camera, if you do see yourself going, getting more advanced later on, but you don't want to be overwhelmed on day one, then this camera is still going to be very, very good for you, because it still has the ability to adjust things more automatically. And then later on, as you start adjusting more manual settings, you're not going to be outgrown by it. So that's basically kind of the summary of this camera, really. But of course, you do have some other settings up here. This camera does have scene modes. Unlike some of the previous Nikon cameras in this range, like the D90 for example, it doesn't have all those individual scene modes directly on the dial. So on this one, it's kind of like the Nikon D5100, D3200, 3100 cameras in that range. It has a scene option here, and what happens is it's in like the kid mode now. No, I think that's actually called the pet mode. But what happens is, as you rotate the rear dial here, you go between the different scene modes once it's on the scene setting up here. So you can go through several different types of scene modes. Basically, a scene mode is still automatic, but what happens is you tell the camera that you're taking a given sort of photo, and it basically picks a group of auto settings that's more appropriate for that situation. So that's basically what that does. So you do have that. In terms of more advanced settings on this camera, you do have a U1 and U2 option here. That basically allows you to customize these two shooting banks. So you can go in here and you can customize your white balance or your ISO, and if you're shooting in different conditions, you could basically just flip the camera to that particular setting, and it would load a certain group of parameters that you automatically, or that you have gone in and programmed in advance. So it's very, very good if you find yourself shooting a given subject with a given group of settings a lot. You can go in there, and instead of having to fiddle and change focus and change ISO and several other things, you can just immediately go to that group of settings by putting it directly on that mode there. You'll also notice right below that you've got your drive modes. So this basically allows you to go between, like, say for example, a single shot, which is basically exactly as it sounds. You press the shutter button down, it takes one photo. But you also have your two continuous options here. You've got a continuous low speed, which allows you to go in the menu and set the camera to a speed less than the camera's max 6 frames per second drive. Or if you go to the continuous high, it will fire at its max continuous of 6 frames per second. So that's basically what you have there. You have the quiet mode, which sadly Nikon has not figured out how to make a proper quiet mode. Canon, they seem to have done much better with that. But basically what that mode does is it tries to make the sound of the shutter quieter. So we'll do this on single here. Okay, that's on just the regular, and we'll put it on quiet mode here. That's it on quiet. So yeah, it kind of makes the same sound, but just lengthens the duration of the sound, so it's kind of lame actually. But anyways, then you've got the self timer, and you have the remote, and that's for your wireless remote. This camera's remote sensor is on the front of the camera. It's actually right there, right above the camera's logo. It would be nice if this camera had that option, had the option to have two sensors on it like some of the cameras below it, but anyways, just a small little gripe, I guess. And then of course mirror lock up right there, which allows you to separate the mirror swinging from the shutter going off. So if you're doing any type of long exposure work or macro work, you can avoid extra vibration caused by the mirror swinging during the exposure. So that's basically what that gives you. This camera does have 2 card slots, which is kind of nice. So, if you want to shoot RAW plus JPEG, or if you want to have your still images going to one card and your video going to another, that's nice. And it also allows you to do a backup option if you want to. So if you were shooting something very critical, it's actually possible to have the same information go to both cards simultaneously. Whoa, I almost knocked my light over. So that's nice. One of the other main areas that you see a difference in terms of controls on this camera is, if we go over to full manual here, we kind of looked at how the auto settings work, but the nice thing about this camera is if you see yourself using the manual settings a lot later on, or if you see yourself becoming more advanced, or maybe even if you're wanting to use this as like a second camera if you're shooting anything professionally, the nice thing about this is you can access a lot of manual settings without having to go through a lot of different menus. So in terms of things like, say for example, just starting with the basics as far as like your f-stop and your shutter speed, the nice thing about this camera is it has two dials. So it has one on the rear here, and it has one right up there at front. And on Nikon, how this works is the front dial up here controls f-stop, and the rear dial controls shutter speed. So you can adjust those independently. And it's a small touch, but I do like how the meter shows up on the rear of this camera as well as in the viewfinder, so that's pretty neat. In terms of your other settings like ISO, those team up with the playback buttons over here, so they kind of serve dual purposes. Like this is zoom in and zoom out, and then this allows you to lock a photo and keep it from being deleted, and then it has a little question mark there to allow you to bring up helpful hints if you're in the menu. So if you see something that you want to know what if you see something you want to know more about, you can hit the little button there. It brings up a description like that, so that's pretty neat. But of course when you're shooting, these serve to change things like white balance, ISO, and quality. So if I wanted to change my ISO here, press and hold that button, rotate the rear dial, and I can adjust ISO. I would do the same thing with white balance and with the quality as well. Over on this side, we have all of our connections, audio video out, analog audio video out I should say, USB, and then a mini HDMI connector. Then below that you have this jack right here, which allows you to plug in a microphone. There are manual audio level controls on this camera as well. And then over on this side you have a connector for the wired remote and also for Nikon's GPS module. One other thing that's very easy to adjust on this camera is its focus system. Over on this side of the camera you have your autofocus and manual focus lever here. But the big news here is this center part of it, which is actually a button. So while you're shooting, you can actually press that button in, and normally whenever you're holding the camera it falls pretty naturally under your left thumb there. But anyways, you press that button, and as you rotate the rear dial, you can go between the focus drive mode. You can go between like auto focus automatic drive selection, or you can go between single or continuous. And then by pressing and holding it and rotating the front dial, you can change the area modes, how the focus points are actually used. So if you're on single point like that, the camera will focus on just that one point, but then you can also tell it to use different amounts of points in dynamic focus also. So depending on the size of your subject and their motion, you can adjust how many points the camera is going to use to keep track of the subject. So that's very easy to adjust. You also have some other options down here on the info screen that you can adjust as well. So you can change some of the common things like movie quality, color space, and you can also customize the front function buttons also. So that's very nice. Okay, we'll go ahead and look at the Sony now. I will also point out that the Nikon is a partial metal body, and it has weather sealing around the buttons, so that's nice. If you, once again, that's something that's going to be more beneficial if you're looking for a camera that's going to that you're going to use in a more manual way, or if you're a more advanced amateur. Okay, looking at the Sony here, One might say that the Sony is a bit more consumerized, so to speak, if that's even a word. But that's not a bad thing at all. The Sony does have the newer features. The D7000 is getting a bit older these days. I mean, Nikon hasn't really said anything about replacing any of the cameras in that range so far, but we'll just have to see. But anyways, the Sony does have newer features. It does have GPS built in, which is very nice. It's also 24 megapixels, so if you're going to print larger, that's also very good. And as of now, the only DSLRs that can do 60 frames per second in 1080p video are the Sonys. So Sony definitely has some very, very unique features. If we look up here at the top, mode dial is, it's another mode dial. No, just kidding. It's got everything laid out in a very similar function, or a similar layout to the Nikon. You do have a dedicated video mode up here. You've got your more manual settings over on this side of the dial. So you've got manual and shutter priority, aperture priority, and program. And then you have auto as well as auto plus on this. And then Sony, they kind of choose to split their scene modes up a little bit. So instead of having everything under a scene setting on the dial, they put a couple of the more commonly used things directly on the dial, and then all the rest they put under the scene setting. So you'll notice here we've got a setting for no flash, so that's directly on the dial. Anyways, that's a scene setting that allows you access to all the others, so we'll get to in a second. Then you've got the sweet Panorama, which is a feature unique to Sony DSLRs, and basically that allows the camera to create a panoramic image directly in the camera. Basically what happens is you set the camera up to you can actually set the camera up to take either a vertical or a horizontal panorama, and then you press the shutter button once and you basically just move the camera in the direction of the arrow, and as you pan it, it continues to take shots and it stitches those all in camera, so it's actually pretty cool. Then you have a 3D option, which allows you to take photos in 3D. That play back pretty nicely on Sony's 3D TV, so that's pretty neat as well if you have a 3D TV. And then you've got the 10 frame per second mode, which allows the camera to shoot at its max burst rate of 10 frames per second. Okay, we'll go back and take a look at the other scene modes here. Once we're on scene on this camera, what you do is you press the function button right here, and all the way at the top there's a thing that says scene mode selection, and then you can go through and select your scene modes that way. And there's a few of them in there. A lot of these we've seen many times. Portrait, sports action, macro, etc. So while this is a higher camera in Sony's range, it still gives you the ability to see exactly what these scene modes do, which is pretty neat. It's a little bit more beginner friendly, because you can say, okay, this is what a portrait setting does, this is what sports setting does, and so on. So that's pretty nice. We have talked quite a bit about Sony video in the past. I even have a video dedicated to talking about nothing but Sony DSLR video. If you guys have not looked at that, go and look at my other videos and you will see it. And that goes into a lot more detail about that. I can kind of briefly show you here. Okay, now you guys should be able to see this set up pretty well. Okay, someone was asking me about the Sonys in their video mode, and they were saying that, okay, why is it that whenever I'm shooting video with the Sony, I have the shot framed up a certain way, and then as soon as I hit the video record button, the camera crops in a little bit like that. After a little bit of research, I found out that that's actually because of just the way the Sony's stabilization system works. The camera actually doesn't use the sensor shift whenever it's recording. It uses the electronic stabilization instead, and so that's why you end up with that crop in there. If you want to avoid that, what you'll notice that I'm just in a stills mode right now, and I started recording video by hitting the record button. if instead of doing that, if you just go directly over to the video mode up here on the main dial, like this, if you do that and you start out from that mode, then it automatically crops in the display. So when you start recording, what you see is what you get. So that's just a nice little tip that I thought I would point out to you guys. Focusing on the Sony in video mode is way better than on the Nikon, and that's mostly just because of Sony's well, it's actually all because of Sony's translucent mirror technology. On the Nikon, its mirror has to be up whenever it's focusing, and it has to contrast detect focus, and it doesn't have the faster phase detect focus, whereas the Sony can still have that because its mirror stays fixed all the time, and its better focusing sensors can still see. So autofocus is much better. The only downside to the Sony video capability is the fact that you can't adjust audio levels manually. So that's why I said that, you know, if you guys are looking for something that's going to, if you're looking for something where you're going to actually, that you're actually going to use to do like cinematography or short films or anything like that, then you're better off with the Nikon, or perhaps even the Canon 60D, which that's probably the topic of another video. But anyways, so that's basically where you are there. We've got an SD card over here, SD card slot over here. It is nice that Sony allows you to use memory sticks or SD now, so that's a plus. Of course, I already mentioned the built-in GPS, which is nice. You have your remote jack right there, and microphone jack. You can't manually adjust the levels, but you do still have a place to plug in an external mic. And then you have your HDMI and your USB connection right here. So all in all, very, very well designed. I also like the fact that the Sony has a swiveling LCD as well, so that's very nice. In terms of controls, I'll put this one on manual just like we did the Nikon. In terms of controls on this one, it is a bit trickier. So you can see here, I still adjust the shutter speed. Of course, it's with the front dial. And on this camera, there is no rear dial. So in order to adjust shutter speed, you press the rear button here, the AEL button, and that serves as an aperture adjustment in this mode. And of course, you still have you do have a dedicated ISO button, so that's nice at least. And you can change those settings right there. So that's nice. I will also point out something else. In another video, someone was asking me about the max ISO sensitivity. I believe that was on the A57 video. And I said that the max ISO sensitivity was like 25,600, and someone was like, man, I don't know how to get the camera there. Well, on Sony, the A65 is actually exactly like the A57 in terms of ISO adjustment. If you press this ISO button, you'll see all the normal ISO adjustment there. That takes us up to 16,000, as you can see, and then it stops. But up at the top, there's an option up here that says multi-frame noise reduction. So let me darken this screen down so you guys can still see. Which that does bring me to another point as well. It is nice that on the Sony, because of the electronic viewfinder and because of the translucent mirror technology, you are able to adjust aperture and shutter speed, and whatever it looks like on the screen is what your picture is going to look like. So that's actually kind of convenient, especially if you're just starting out. Okay, let's go back to that ISO adjustment now. So anyways, at the top there is a thing called multi-frame noise reduction. And whenever you select that option, whoops, actually I did that wrong. Actually, you just kind of hover over it, and then you press the right arrow, and then this right here becomes selected. Now you'll see that you can go all the way up to 25,600. So that's actually how you get there. You have to use that multi-frame noise reduction mode I kind of wish it weren't that way. But anyways, basically what this setting does is the camera takes several shots. It takes 6 shots if I remember correctly, and it analyzes them all for noise, and it subtracts noise out that way. So in order to get to that high ISO, you have to use that mode. So anyways, I think that that's actually about it. In closing, I will say that both of these are certainly very good cameras. If you're already more advanced, or if you see yourself getting more advanced, or even if you're more of a pro or advanced amateur user that's looking for a second body, the D7000 kind of fits that bill more. Downside to the D7000 is frankly, it's a much older camera at this point, in DSLR years at least. And so some of the newer features, like the higher megapixel but lower noise sensor, is missing, so it's 16 megapixels versus 24. It would also be nice if Nikon would finally put GPS in a camera and not make you plug in a silly module. That would be very, very nice. So anyways, that's where you are there. Strengths to the D7000: you do have better controls, you do have better build. The A65 though gives you much newer features. It's also a much better bargain in this range if you're looking for something, especially if you're looking for something that shoots faster. So unless you're going to just be using a lot of really manual settings, especially like in video, things along those lines, I still feel like the A65 is going to be the better camera to go with at the price. Even with the sale price on the D7000, the A65 is still a couple $100 cheaper, so that's something to keep in mind also. I guess the final thing is a new debate, and that's the electronic viewfinder versus the optical viewfinder. I personally still prefer the optical viewfinder, but we're not talking about my preferences, so that's why I would encourage everyone that's looking for a camera to go out and you may absolutely love the electronic viewfinder in the A65, you may absolutely hate it, but you won't know until you go and try it personally, so keep that in mind also. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, Photog J the Great, signing off.